The ground is still being cleared. The power lines are still being repaired. The families are still sorting through what is left of their homes. And yet, even as emergency crews work around the clock across Oklahoma, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, meteorologists are already watching the next system taking shape on radar. And what they are seeing suggests that the worst of the 2026 severe weather season may not be behind us. It may be right around the corner. What has unfolded across the central United States over the past 2 weeks is not a single storm. It is not one bad day of weather that will be talked about and then forgotten. It is a sustained, relentless, and historically active outbreak sequence that has already shattered records, sent communities scrambling for shelter, damaged or destroyed hundreds of homes, struck a United States military installation, and forced meteorologists to use language they reserve for only the most dangerous and extreme events. And the atmosphere is not done yet. Let us go back to the beginning, because to understand where this is heading, you have to understand where it started and how fast things have escalated. The 2026 severe weather season opened unusually early and unusually aggressively. From January through mid-April, the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Chicago had already issued a record-high number of severe thunderstorm and tornado warnings, 128 in total through April 19th alone, a number that had never been reached that early in a calendar year in the office's recorded history. Northern Illinois, in particular, had become something close to a permanent target. By mid-April, the NWS Chicago forecast area had already logged at least 20 confirmed tornadoes, and the historical average for that region is between 10 and 20 for an entire calendar year. The season had already equaled a full year's worth of tornado activity before spring was even fully underway. The Storm Prediction Center had issued enhanced or higher risk designations for the area 15 separate days through April 19th alone. The atmosphere, in short, had been primed and ready to fire all season long. Then came April 17th. On the afternoon of April 17, 2026, a severe weather system that forecasters had been tracking for days finally detonated across a massive swath of the central United States. The Storm Prediction Center had flagged the event days in advance, and its warnings proved accurate with devastating precision. Multiple tornadoes tore through communities across a 650-mile corridor stretching from Oklahoma all the way up through the Midwest to Michigan. The town of Lena, Illinois, was struck by a large, high-end EF2 tornado that caused structural damage so severe that drone footage the next morning showed homes with their roofs entirely ripped off, exposing the interiors and scattered possessions of the families who had lived there. In Ringgold, Wisconsin, approximately 75 homes were damaged by a tornado that trapped multiple residents in basements, requiring search and rescue operations by local fire departments in the middle of the night. What happened in Ringgold, Wisconsin on the night of April 17th captures the human reality of these events in a way that radar maps and tornado counts cannot. Fire Chief Chris Kielman told CNN that approximately 75 homes were damaged by the tornado that struck the small town. Some of those homes were, in his words, demolished. Search and rescue teams worked through the darkness, pulling people out of basements. And then, just as those teams were making progress through the wreckage, a second storm system moved through. Less powerful, but enough to pause operations briefly before crews resumed. The Stevenson County Sheriff in neighboring Illinois stood in front of cameras that night and told reporters, as he shook his head, that he simply could not believe there were no injuries. He had driven through the destruction personally, he had seen what was left, and the fact that nobody had died inside those homes that were, in his words, lost, was something he struggled to process as anything other than a near miracle. That is the nature of modern severe weather preparedness working as designed. The warnings go out, the sirens sound, the people get underground. And when they emerge, they find destruction where their homes used to be, but they emerge alive. Marathon County in Wisconsin reported significant damage across a wide area. Near Rochester, Minnesota, 2 separate tornadoes tracked through communities in Olmsted County, with aerial footage showing rows of buildings stripped of entire floors or sections of walls. By the time storm survey teams finished their work, the National Weather Service had confirmed 80 separate tornadoes from that single outbreak, making it the biggest tornado outbreak of 2026 so far. The strongest twisters were 2 EF3 tornadoes that tore through Wisconsin with winds sufficient to strip exterior walls from homes and level out buildings entirely. And yet, despite the extraordinary scale of the destruction, no lives were lost that day. The warning system, the public response, the shelter decisions made by thousands of people across multiple states, they held. 80 tornadoes and 0 fatalities is not just remarkable. It is almost miraculous, and it speaks to the importance of the early warning systems that allow people to take cover before these storms arrive. But that record-breaking outbreak was only the beginning of what April 2026 had in store. On April 23rd, just 6 days after the massive outbreak, a new system ignited across the southern plains. And this time, the atmosphere produced something far more violent than the previous event. At 8:22 in the evening, the National Weather Service office in Norman, Oklahoma, issued a tornado emergency for southeast Enid, Oklahoma, a rare and extremely serious designation reserved for situations where a confirmed large and destructive tornado is already on the ground and threatening lives in a populated area. Tornado emergencies are not issued lightly. They represent the highest level of urgency the Weather Service can communicate, and they carry an unmistakable message to anyone in the path of the storm. Seek shelter immediately, because this is life-threatening. The tornado that triggered that emergency was on the ground for 9 miles. It packed maximum wind speeds estimated at 170 to 175 miles per hour. At its widest point, it measured 500 yards across, nearly a third of a mile of rotating destruction, cutting through a city of 50,000 people. When damage survey teams arrived the following morning, the National Weather Service rated it an EF4 on the enhanced Fujita scale, the second highest classification for tornado intensity, indicating winds capable of leveling Garfield County, Oklahoma, since April 26, 1991. It was the first EF4 in the entire state of Oklahoma since 2024. The damage in Enid's Gray Ridge neighborhood on the south side of the city knocked down and power lines left wrapped in chunks of debris. Vehicles were flipped and left sitting on their roofs in residential streets. Some residents were trapped inside their own homes by the debris surrounding them and had to be rescued by police, firefighters, and the Oklahoma Highway Patrol working door to door in the darkness after the storm passed. One Enid resident described being in her cellar, hearing the roaring of the tornado above her, and emerging to find the windows of her home smashed and the roof badly damaged. Others were not as fortunate with their property, returning to find entire rooms exposed to the sky or structures completely gone. At nearby Vance Air Force Base, and one of the United States military's primary pilot training facilities, fences were downed, equipment was damaged, and the base was forced to close due to power and water outages following the storm's passage. All personnel were accounted for, and no military injuries were reported, but the fact that an EF4 tornado had tracked directly through a United States Air Force installation underlined just how far-reaching the danger had been. Enid's mayor, David Mason, reported that at least 40 homes sustained significant damage in the Gray Ridge area alone. 10 to 15 people were injured across the city, though no fatalities were recorded. Again, an outcome that, given the tornado's size and power, reflects the combination of effective warning systems, community preparedness, and what can only be described as extraordinary fortune. When buildings are being pushed off their foundations by 175-mile-per-hour winds, the margin between injury and death is often measured in inches and seconds. The April 23rd system was not limited to Enid. Across the plains, that same evening produced more than 140 reports of large hail, damaging winds, and at least 20 tornadoes stretching from Oklahoma to Iowa. Near Brahman, Oklahoma, a separate large tornado forced extreme meteorologist Dr. Reed Timmer to take shelter in a roadside ditch as the storm passed overhead. That same storm produced a rare satellite tornado, a weaker secondary twister rotating around the parent tornado, a phenomenon that storm chasers rarely capture on camera. Hailstones measuring 4 inches in diameter were recorded near Marion, Kansas. A 3.75-inch stone was measured at Bremen, Oklahoma. In Kearney, Missouri, north of Kansas City, downed trees and debris blocked roads and damaged homes. An EF1 tornado struck the west side of Joplin, Missouri, a city that carries its own profound and painful history with tornado devastation from the catastrophic 2011 event. Now, as crews are still working to restore power, clear debris, and begin the rebuilding process in Enid and the other communities struck over the past 2 weeks, the Storm Prediction Center is issuing outlooks for additional severe weather in the coming days. The Fox Forecast Center and AccuWeather are both tracking new systems developing across the Central Plains with the potential to produce dangerous supercells capable of all severe hazards, large hail, destructive winds, and strong tornadoes. A level 3 out of 5 risk has been issued for parts of the Midwest and Mississippi Valley, including Missouri, Wisconsin, and Iowa, with St. Louis identified as a city that could see some of the greatest impacts. A level 4 of 5 risk area has already been placed over parts of the Plains corridor, indicating a more significant potential outbreak in that zone. The atmospheric setup that has been driving this relentless activity is not accidental. A strong, low-level jet stream drawing warm, moist air northward from the Gulf of Mexico has been colliding repeatedly with colder, drier air masses descending from the north. Exactly the kind of collision that produces the violent convective instability that fuels supercell thunderstorms and tornadoes. When those two air masses meet along a dry line or a cold front over the flat, open terrain of the Central Plains, the result is an environment that meteorologists describe as almost textbook perfect for tornado production. The warm, moist, unstable air at lower levels provides fuel The colder, drier air aloft creates the atmospheric instability needed for storms to build explosively. And the jet stream overhead provides the wind shear, the change in wind speed and direction with altitude that causes thunderstorm updrafts to rotate and eventually form the supercells that produce the most violent tornadoes. What has made 2026 particularly dangerous is that this setup has been refreshing itself over and over again throughout the late winter and spring. Rather than a single prolonged outbreak or a brief active period, the season has been characterized by repeated rounds of severe weather separated by just enough time for one system to move east before the next one fires up in its place. The result is communities that barely have time to recover from one event before they are sheltering again from the next. The lower Great Lakes region and the corridor from eastern Iowa into southern Wisconsin and northern Illinois have been particularly relentless hotspots. Logging, tornado reports, damaging wind events, and significant hail events in a concentration that forecasters describe as remarkably active, even by historical standards. AccuWeather's long-range forecast for 2026 had projected between 1,050 and 1,250 tornadoes for the full year, roughly around the historical average. But within that projection was a specific warning that AccuWeather meteorologist Alex Duffus delivered in February with language that has proven prescient. "Do not let your guard down this severe weather season," he said, because flash floods and damaging wind gusts can be just as destructive as tornadoes and often impact a much larger area. And it only takes one storm striking a densely populated or vulnerable community to make this a devastating season, regardless of what the final tornado count shows. Beyond the immediate human cost of these events, there is an economic dimension that rarely gets covered with the seriousness it deserves. When an EF4 tornado tears through a city like Enid, the destruction is not limited to the homes and vehicles caught directly in its path. The damage radiates outward through the local economy in ways that take months or years to fully quantify. Small businesses destroyed, rental housing lost, a military base closed and disrupted, insurance claims that will take months to resolve, government emergency declarations that redirect resources and personnel, schools closed the following day, workers unable to reach their jobs through debris-clogged streets, and in communities that have already been through multiple severe weather events in a single season, the cumulative toll, emotional, financial, and physical, begins to compound in ways that individual event reports rarely capture. Garfield County had not seen an EF4 tornado since 1991. For many residents there, April 23rd, 2026 became the kind of night that is forever divided into before and after. The April 17th outbreak and the April 23rd events have both validated that warning in different ways. 80 tornadoes in a single day across a 650-mile corridor. An EF4 cutting through a city of 50,000 and striking a military base. Hailstones the size of softballs. Wind gusts approaching 90 miles per hour. Hundreds of homes damaged or destroyed. Communities in multiple states simultaneously. Overwhelmed by storm damage. And forecasters watching the next system taking shape on their models with the same level of concern that preceded both of the major events already on the books. County area of Michigan resulted in significant damage, but critically, no tornado watch had been issued at the time, partly because the storm was concentrated in a limited geographic area, and the highest risk level in the region that day was only a level 1 marginal designation. In the aftermath, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer's office called for a formal probe into the absence of that tornado watch alert and directly raised the question of whether funding cutbacks to the National Weather Service under the current administration had played any role in the detection and warning failure. That question, whether political decisions about Weather Service staffing and resources are directly impacting the quality and timeliness of life-saving storm warnings, has not been answered publicly and remains an active and deeply serious concern for meteorologists, emergency managers, and ordinary citizens across tornado-prone states who depend on those warnings to know when to seek shelter and when they can stay in their homes. There is also a broader context that makes 2026's severe weather activity particularly worth paying close attention to. Scientists studying the long-term behavior of severe weather in the United States have noted that the traditional boundaries of Tornado Alley, the zone across the southern and central plains historically most associated with tornado activity, have been shifting and expanding in recent decades. Events that might once have been concentrated in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas are now increasingly occurring in the Midwest, the Great Lakes region, and even farther into the south and east. The April 2026 activity in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota reflects that pattern. These are states with real tornado history, but the frequency and intensity of recent events has exceeded what communities there may have been fully prepared for. The warning system that has prevented deaths in both the April 17th and April 23rd events is extraordinary and worth acknowledging directly. The Storm Prediction Center's multi-day outlook system, the National Weather Service's local watches and warnings, the tornado emergency designation that gave residents of Enid those critical final minutes to reach shelter. These systems have saved lives that, in previous generations, would have been lost, but warnings only work if people act on them. And what the 2026 season has made absolutely clear is that severe weather preparedness cannot be assumed or taken for granted, especially in communities that are now experiencing these events with a frequency they have not historically seen. As the season moves deeper into late April and toward May, traditionally the most active period for tornado and severe weather activity across the Central Plains and Mississippi Valley, the question facing communities from Texas to Michigan is not whether there will be more outbreaks. There will be. The question is whether people, families, local governments, and emergency management systems are fully ready for what is still to come. Because the atmosphere has made one thing unmistakably clear in 2026, it is not finished, the outbreak is ongoing, the season is at its peak, and the next storm is already forming.